Well, what's up, everyone? Hey, I actually have sound now. Look at that. I actually didn't forget to unmute my mic. We're getting more and more professional every day. So, yeah, like I didn't really have anything to do tonight, so I figured I'd hop on and do some painting with y'all and see what I can't get done. I know that's a lie because I have my stream pulled up. Or are you saying audio as in yay audio? Because I never have audio. It's the weirdest thing. It's the one thing on the stream that I've been doing just absolutely terrible with. Besides, dropping a miniature. So, like I said, I had nothing better to do, so I figured I'd hop on and do some paint. I got a really awesome new miniature by a company called Loot Studios. I've been subscribed to them for a long time. They have some really cool, high quality, high detail miniatures. And so, adjust this light here. And so I wanted to really quick paint this boy. And he looks super awesome. So this is part of the miniature, and I just love this mold. He's got some really cool armor. I love the sword, but one of the cool parts about this is he also has a really cool set of wings that will attach to his back. But I wanted to get as much detail on this miniature as possible, so I'm actually going to wait to glue these onto the miniature, and you can kind of see the holes in his back to where they're going to go until after I'm done painting both the wings and the miniature itself. So one of the interesting things about this model is its armor. It's got a lot of really cool detail on the armor, and I'm going to try and do something that I've never done on this scale before, which is called non-metallic metal, or NMM. And non-metallic metal is one of a very, I don't want to say very advanced, but a pretty advanced painting method where you paint the miniature as if it's metal, but you're not using like metallic paints, right? So metallic paints are paints that have mica powder in it to make it look shiny and make it look like metal. So we're gonna try to make this thing look like it's metal and has all the really cool reflections that metal has without any of that. So I'm going to do the armor in a silver color, and all of the really cool like details, like you see this little cross he's got on his chest, some of the like flares and stuff like that on his shoulder pads. We're gonna be painting those in gold. And then his tunic here is going to be a nice rich red. And I haven't super decided on a skin tone yet, but we'll start with the really, really hard parts and we'll work our way there. For the wings, I've already kind of base coated these. So I base coated them in a kind of a blue gray, and I worked in kind of a gradient so that these raised parts are a little bit brighter. I'm gonna do something very similar to these with what I did with Elbereth's wings, and we will use a dry brushing technique to gradually make it brighter. We're gonna make the tops of the wings and then the bottom where it flares out here brighter than, of course, the center here, and then the inside of the wings I'm gonna use mostly dark paint, but this inner edge, this little hump right here, is going to be a little bit brighter than, of course, the inside of the wing would be. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So with non-metallic metal, I'm genuinely not good at it. So this is going to be as much of a learning experience for me as anything else. Oh, tell me I'm not out of white paint. Might be out of this particular white paint. I've got some in the other room, but there we go, some white. We'll take some jet black. And this is going to be the basis for our shadows and highlights. And one thing that you might not expect, blue. So what's up, Leon? How you doing? So with non-metallic metal, you want it to make it look like it is yeah, it does look cool. And actually, if you look closely, that's actually not with the lights or anything like that. So I used a Zenithal highlight, so a lot of those shades are just painted on there. So I really like the way it looks without that, but I really want to try this. So I added some blue, and what blue is going to do is it's going to give us this idea, this impression of highlights from the surrounding area, right? So when we look at metal, it's not just reflecting light, it's reflecting the grass, it's reflecting the sky, right? And so a lot of what we're going to be using as far as the blue goes is a lot of what we see around us is blue, right? We've got the blue sky. So that is really what we're going to be using here. I had to look up a tutorial on how to do non-metallic metal a lot because again, I'm not that great at it. But from what everybody says is what we want to really start out with is a dark gray blue. And I'm using the absolute smallest brush I have. What I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be working in these shaded areas in very random kind of strokes. And what this will give us is, and it's even okay if I miss some spots, but if you notice, if you look at metal, none of the reflections in metal are actually consistent, right? There are scratches and imperfections in the steel or gold or whatever you're looking at. And so you don't really want this to be super consistent. You just want it to be there. So we're just going to start kind of randomly placing brush strokes. It's okay if we leave some of the black or some of the light white there, because again, we want this to kind of look inconsistent. And we'll do the same up the top. Just like that. And from what I've heard and from what I've read about non-metallic metal is it's okay if it looks bad, because it's going to look bad up until the point where you finish, which is kind of why I'm nervous. You know, using a technique that I'm not familiar with, that I don't think I'm really well equipped to do. But you know what? Practice is what it takes, and so if I'm going to make mistakes, might as well share my mistakes with y'all, so you can, if you want to learn from it, you can learn from it. If you want to laugh at me for it, you can laugh at me for it, and everyone's a winner. So once again, we're just using kind of these random brush strokes. It's all right if we leave some of the base coat there, because again, we want it to kind of look inconsistent. And we're going to do the same on the back. And of course the back is a little bit easier because it's just one big open space versus this having a lot of those other details on it. So, and shoulder pads. Yeah, it did kind of look like that. Again, this model in and of itself looks super cool, which is why I genuinely couldn't wait to actually for tomorrow to start on them. So we'll get started on a little bit tonight, and then we'll keep at it on our stream tomorrow night. I have not. Most of, pretty much, I say most. Yeah, most of what I paint is fantasy. I painted some like Warhammer 40k stuff, but I have not painted anything from like anime or anything like that. Well, I take that back. I did a little while ago. By a little while ago, I mean like December. My worship leader at church wanted to gift his kids some Pokemon Christmas ornaments. And so I 3D printed and painted up a couple of those, but haven't done anything from Naruto. So one of the things that I'm doing as I'm just kind of slapping this paint on is I'm really looking at the miniature, trying to figure out where I want my light source to be, because not in non-metallic metal, really in any painting, it's very important to know where your light source is, but even more so with non-metallic metal. Not gonna lie, I have no idea about like literally anything about Naruto. I've never watched it, so I have no idea who that is. Brush is not wanting to behave with me. It keeps splitting. I might need to find me a new number 0 brush, because this one has never really worked right. Always tries to the end tries to split up on me and doesn't stay in that nice sharp point. Which in miniature painting, you want your small brushes to stay, or to have that nice sharp point, because those are the stuff you can do your really super fine details with. I mean, I'm into anime to an extent. It's just one of those things where, like, you know, there are movies that everybody says are classics or animes or whatever, like. I just never took the time to, or I couldn't watch them as a kid either because my parents wouldn't let me, or I didn't have the capability of watching it, right? I just never bothered going back and watching them. It's not that I don't like it or that I think I wouldn't like it. It's literally has more to do with me just not really having the desire to. Don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of where I'm at with things like Naruto, Pokemon, Dragon Ball Z. Didn't really have access to those animes as a kid, so don't really have a desire to watch them now because I've lived 30 years without watching them. I'm pretty sure I can go the rest of my life without watching them and not really miss it. All right, so the next step is going to be taking some white and bringing it in, along with a little bit of blue. We're going to want to start bringing in some of those brighter highlights. Now, some of the people I was watching really explaining non-metallic metal, one of the biggest things that they said is you really want to jump up in brightness very, very quickly when it comes to this. Blue into this. Again, I am brand new at this, so if I'm making a mistake and he ends up looking terrible, well, that's what they make paint stripper for. Alright, so we're going to start working our way from this center shadow down towards his belt. And you can't really tell it very well on camera, but it almost has this like swoop to it as well, so it's not a straight linear line here. Even this up a little bit. Kind of like that. And if I find that this is too much of like a contrast, like the lines are too sharp, then I'll go back with a glaze and smooth it out. But I'm gonna wait till I'm finished, because like I said, everything that I've read about doing non-metallic metal has said it's really not gonna look great until you finish. So finish it first and then go back if you need to. So we're gonna finish it first and go back if we need to. Cool. And we'll do the same thing on the back. Back isn't going to be as important as the front, seeing as how it's going to be covered with the wings for the most part, but for the sake of just practice and making sure that, you know, we, for whatever reason, if those wings break off, which it's resin, so they might actually do that, I'm able to go back and reattach, or it actually looks good. Let's bring these shoulders down a little bit more. Give it a little bit more of a curve to it. So the armor here is curved a little bit. Yep. Cool, 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 cool. Start working on our legs here. Now, one thing with sharp points like this is the point itself would be reflective, so we're going to add a little bit more of a, like a line reflection along most of our sharp edges. I say most because there will be some that are in shadow that wouldn't catch light. mix a couple of these. It's not looking too terrible yet. Well, yet, right now, it's not. The fact that I don't think it's looking bad might be a cause for concern, though. Alright. These shoes are going to be interesting. A lot of fine detail here. There are some miniature painters who get so into non-metallic metal that they will go all the way to say, like, they'll actually look up some scientific data on how light actually reflects. More power to them. I do not have that kind of time in my life to dedicate. I wish I did, because it'd be cool to be one of those top tier painters who really makes this, you know, their painting look ultra realistic. I would love to be at that level. But we all have lives, and so we do what we can, right? Now, one of the things we're going to do at the very end is we're going to go in, and after we're done painting the base of this, I'm also going to add like a counter reflection, I guess you could say. So we're kind of reflecting in the color choice that we're using, we're reflecting the sky. And once we're done with all of that, on all these dark spots, we're going to add a little bit of a glaze to reflect whatever color I end up painting the ground, because that's how it would work, I'm assuming. I'm not a scientist, so I'm not an expert on how light works, but again, gleaning from what other painters have demonstrated, I think that is how light would work. There are some details on this that we're going to have to come back and really highlight up as well. For now, we'll just stick with the basics. Now we'll start working on these thigh pieces. I'm going to try and do, like, there's this kind of cool like overlay on these thigh pieces. I'm going to do that in gold, I think, and just do the silver around it. Add a little bit of an edge highlight here. Just like that. this is probably going to be what I'm working on for the next couple of streams. There's just so much here, so much detail. And with this, you know, with non-metallic metal, with me trying this out for the first time, I know I'm going to be making mistakes and doing a lot of corrections. So we're going to be, with this particular model, we're going to be in it for the long haul, y'all. I don't know if y'all can see this, but you can if I kind of put it over like a shadowed area. See how the tip of my brush is not staying straight? I really hate that, and I'm kind of getting frustrated because this is not a cheap brush. I've taken really good care of it, so, but we'll move back to a cheaper brush that I've had for years now, which is a Wargamer, Army Painter's Wargamer detail brush. It's about the same size, but this thing has actually never let me down. That brush is just honestly becoming kind of a disappointment. Or more like a point of frustration because it's not doing what these much cheaper brushes have done. I think this brush is maybe a $10 brush and that one's like a $20, $25 brush. It's a much nicer brush, better materials. Yeah, this one has worked consistently better. Now, one thing with non-metallic metal that I've learned just from watching other people do it, whenever you have like, you kind of want to think of things in terms of shapes, right? You want to think in terms of like cylinders and circles and spheres. So I'm kind of thinking of these shoulder pieces as spheres. And then when I was doing down here, I was thinking of them more of cylinders. Because light will interact with those differently. Very true. I guess the frustration for me in this particular brush, which is made by Monument Hobbies from their Pro Sable line, is I have 4 other of their brushes that have worked great. Maybe it was just an issue with that particular brush. You know, which is annoying, but like maybe it was a Friday for someone, right? Which is, you know, because I believe these are handmade. So I'm not going to expect 100% quality 100% of the time. It's just a little bit disappointing. And we'll come over to the other side and do the same thing to this pauldron. Honestly, I should probably go back to using cheap brushes because I've heard, and I don't know how true this is, that a lot of the guys who do miniature painting professionally and who are like Crystal Brush Award winners don't actually use sable hair brushes. They'll use like $5 packs from like you know, like Hobby Lobby or something like that, and just throw them away whenever they go bad because they're so cheap. I don't know how accurate that is, but that's what I've heard. I'm just going to touch this up a little bit. A little piece I forgot over on the other side too, where it kind of curls back up. Add a reflection right there. this is gonna be interesting because there's a lot of complex shapes on his greaves. I'm trying to figure out how I'm going to deal with that. I'm imagining the light source coming from the top. So just trying to figure out how that would interact. We've got almost like, you know, like I said earlier, I like to treat some of these as like cylinders in different shapes that they aren't. The problem with this is there are solid lines in some of these. So like those lines would obviously catch and glint light a little bit more than the rest of it. But again, if it looks bad, oh well, we're learning. Elbow piece here. Add ourselves a little bit of a line highlight. Line highlight's not really the right term, more of a edge highlight. Go. Yeah. That was kind of gross, wasn't it? All right. Now on these little pieces here. I don't know what they're called on actual armor, but they're the parts that are guarding the back of his hand. Some things that I want to correct over here, so I'm just going to come back to that real quick. There we go. All right, well, that's the first highlight. Now we'll go to the second. Now, from what I understand, you really will only want to keep your highlights to 2 or 3 highlights. So we're really going to start to ramp up our colors here in just a moment. Let's find a good brush that I can use to actually stir this, because I don't want to ruin my small brush. So we're gonna bring in some more white, a bit of water, some more blue, and then just a touch of black. And the reason we're bringing in black again is we're wanting to desaturate the blue, even though that blue is going to be, we want that to be present, and we want that to act as like a sky reflection. We don't want that to be our main color, and so we want that a little bit desaturated. I'm going to want this next highlight pretty bright too, so I'm going to need to add a little bit more white to this. go to the store and get some more white paint, because I am almost out. In fact, I am going to be right back. I got to go grab some more white paint because I just ran out. Be back in 2 seconds. And we're back. So the white color, I don't really use this a ton, but it's made by Golden, and Golden is a company that makes fine art supplies. So it's not really designed for hobby, like miniature painting like the other paints I have, which is why I typically don't use it a ton, because it's quite thick, it's very saturated, and it's not really designed for what we're using it for. But we'll see how it works in this case. There, and that's more the shade of white I want, or the shade of gray that I want to see. Adding a lot more water again because this paint that I'm using is very, 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 very thick. And the final highlight that we're actually going to use for this, once we get to that point, is going to be basically pure white with a little bit of that blue mixed in, but almost pure white. All right, so let's, and we're really going to reduce the area of our highlights down quite a bit. Like that. Along the edge here, it has this kind of cool edge to this armor, so I'm going to add a line here. I'm going to kind of flare it out like so. I think that line's a little too thick. So I'm add a little bit of, bring in some black here. Kind of pull back to that color I had before. And just work that highlight back a little bit to where it's just the edge. Pull in a little bit more blue here. Well, we'll just blend wasn't working out, so I'm just gonna go ham and make that our mid-tone, I guess you could call it. Reestablish our curve here. And then we'll go back to these little knee bits here. There we go. And just start working those highlights all the way up to the edge there. Not terribly pleased with how this is looking, but again, I'm just going to push through and we'll see what happens. Because the worst thing that'll happen is I'm unpleased with how this looks. I throw it in some stripping fluid, and we start over. Either way, it's a learning process. These boots, I'm really going to focus my highlights on the edges here. More so than anything else. Not great, but not terrible. And start working in these shoulder pad highlights. Again, one of the cool things about this is if I'm not really happy with how the transitions look, I can always come back with a glaze and correct it. I think too, one of the things that I personally have to be really patient with on this particular method is I also have to recognize that it's going to look a lot different once I start painting in a lot of the other details as well. Trying to bork that one up. For instance, I don't want to just all of a sudden say, yeah, I don't like how this is look and undo it without having done, say, his hair or cloak or anything like that. So I want to get to the point where I'm finished with this model and then see how everything looks. That way I can make a more informed decision as to whether or not I really like the work that I did instead of kind of jumping the gun. If I make a mistake, one of the things that I was watching, I think it was Ninjon, just put out a video on how to do this kind of stuff. He's a great YouTuber, one of the people I follow. I follow him, follow Squidmar, Miniac, all those guys. And one of the things he was saying is if you make a mistake, you have the excuse of saying, well, light could have just hit that, reflected off that a little bit differently. So that's kind of what I'm going for. If I make a big mistake, or if, you know, something isn't exactly uniform, then I have the benefit of saying, well, light could have just interacted with that a little bit differently. When in reality, I just am terrible at non-metallic metal painting. Okay, let's do his elbow, or his greaves. And we're going to try to kind of trace out some of these more unfortunate. Some of these lines that are on his greaves, because those parts, bits and pieces that would stand out, I guess you could say, that are raised up, would catch the light a little bit more than the flat bits. So we're going to make sure that we get nice sharp edge highlights in all those parts. Try to minimize any overspill. I don't mind how that greave is looking. Give it a nice edge highlight around this little circle piece here. Move on to this elbow here. Again, making sure that anything that is raised gets a reflection. And this kind of leads us naturally to his back again, so we'll go ahead and start here. Like that. And I think if I am going to glaze using this this white that I'm using now, that's I don't normally use, I'll probably end up using a glaze medium instead of using water, mostly because it's such a thick paint. I think that's going to work a little bit better. Yeah, I'm going to try not to drop it. I really don't want to drop it, because this is going to be one of those minis I'm going to be working on for a long time. So that's not the plan. It may happen because I am super klutzy, but we'll see. edge highlights here. I guess that drop, so like at this stage, I don't think I would mind dropping it as much as I did with his. Mostly because with Liam's, I was almost done. And that could have been so catastrophic to the point where I would have had to redo quite a bit. With this, since I'm right at the beginning, I wouldn't mind nearly as much. It still stink because I've already put in a lot of work onto this in just the past 45 minutes, I guess, 50, almost an hour. What's up, B-Cubed? Yeah, exactly. I would much rather get it out of the way earlier than later. Honestly, I would just rather not drop it at all, but like I said, I'm a kind of a klutz, so that's probably going to happen. Always nervous when using a new technique like this, that if I don't do it right, it's gonna look terrible. And it's like, well, you're learning, so it's gonna look terrible either way. Everything looked great the first time you did it, then what's the point of practice, right? This part too, I'm kind of nervous about, like some of these like multifaceted shapes. If everything was flat or everything was like round, it would probably be a little bit easier. Terrible, but you know, just stick to the method, and if it does end up looking terrible, then you know what, we learned something, and if it doesn't, then we get an awesome looking mini. I always tell people whenever I share pictures of work in progress, like, especially if it's their miniature, that you got to trust the process and make sure that you don't expect something to look finished when it's not. Now, I always don't follow that advice myself. I probably should, but I don't. Okay. Now we're going to go to our absolutely brightest highlight, which is going to be mostly white. So we're going to grab a little bit of this white here. We're going to pull in some of our gray and mix those together, but we want it to be mostly white. And this is going to only go on our absolutely brightest highlights. So it's really not going to be a ton. Wasn't bad. How about yours, Calico? Did you do anything fun on Saturday? Or I guess today. I don't know. I know what your Saturdays are like. Homemade or like from a kit? Okay. Yeah, me and my we used to do me and my family used to do pizza night every Friday night, and we'd rent a movie from our local library. And my mom would and us would make homemade pizza every Friday night. It's some of the best memories I have of my childhood. I would love to do that one day with my with future family if that ever happens. I say if only because I have no idea what my future holds, so. Again, for this stage, I'm just hitting where I want the brightest highlights on this. So on the tops, on all the corners, on all my edges. Weather anomalies? Oh. I was like, that doesn't make any sense. And then I thought about it for half a second. I'm like, oh, that actually does. And it's kind of clever. But yes, I would. Having a family is probably one of my greatest hopes and dreams. Yeah. You know, I guess it's not for everyone, but that's always been something that a desire that I've had, to have a family, have kids. I guess, I don't know, for me, I had such a good experience with my family. Like, obviously with any kind of family, like, there are your ups and downs, but, you know, I feel like growing up I had a very close family, and I just want to experience what it would be like to raise kids one day. But no, I know, trust me, I know, I've seen, like, I've worked with enough parents, enough kids to know it's not something that's easy. By any stretch of the imagination. But while it does feel daunting, and I'm not arrogant enough to think that I'm somebody who would make an amazing father, but it is still something that I want. I hope I'd make a good dad. I have no idea. Yeah. And again, it's not because I'm under some delusion that I'd be a great father. It's just, it's a desire that I've always had. You know, I think, you know, I firmly believe that this is a desire that God gave me. So, you know, I trust that if this is a desire that God gave me, that one day that it will happen. If not, then I also trust that God has his reasons why not. I may not know them, but it's kind of part about faith, right? If we knew the future and knew everything that the future would hold, you know, or if God always made it easy for us, then what's the point of faith? Here to the very top, like I said. From what I've learned from other painters, you really want to make sure that it's kind of this idea that less is more. You don't want a ton of super bright highlights. Even though it looks good in some cases, like when we're doing cloth, I think it looks good. When doing metal, you really want to just make sure that the places where you do put highlights matter. You don't just want to put them anywhere. I don't think it looks terrible, but again, we're not done. I might end up putting some, you know, making those transitions a little bit smoother by using a glaze. In fact, I'm going to do that for one of these at least right now. So I'm just going to mix up my glaze real quick. And I'm just going to make this transition on this breastplate a little bit smoother. And again, remembering with glazes, you always want to pull in the same direction. You never want to like move back and forth, because wherever you lift off your brush, you're going to end up with a small pool of water. And that's something that I've had to learn when glazing. Alright, so now that I've gotten that for the most part done, there's still some work that I want to do in smoothing out some of these transitions. And I'll probably, that will probably be an ongoing process, but I'll start moving on to other parts of the miniature just so that I don't sit here and second guess everything that I'm doing, that I can go ahead and do the rest of the miniature, come back to it and see what I think. Because right now, genuinely, I'm not really liking the way it's turning out. But again, if I can get some of these transitions smoothed out with the glaze, you know, I think we'll be in a much better position. But some of these transitions I do want sharp, right? I do want them to look a little bit heavier. Because sometimes that's how light works. Alright, so let's move on to the cloak before I decide to do something I will regret later. Oh, you know what? We haven't done the helmet. I'll wait on the helmet. I'll wait on the helmet. What the heck? I don't know if y'all saw that, but the tip of the bottle came out in the cap. That was bizarre. So we'll bring out our red. We'll grab a slightly larger brush than what we have been using. Grab some black to darken this up a bit for our base coat. On our cloak here. And we're going back to a painting process that I'm actually familiar and comfortable with. Ah, the comfort zone. Feels so good. Trying to figure out where this cloth stops. It's about right there. And again, this whole cloak I'm planning on painting red. And this is something that I've done, geez, 1,000 times as far as kind of doing this with cloth. Cloth, in my mind, or at least the layering process I use, is fairly straightforward. You start with the darkest color that you're going to paint with, and then you just highlight up from there. Generally speaking, I don't put as much thought into this process as far as like making the transition smooth. On some places I will, like where it's flatter, but it's not as important because your eye won't actually notice it all that much. What do you guys think? What color should this guy's hair be? I'm kind of on the fence. Yeah, so if you look right here, that's hair coming out from underneath the helmet. So there is a little bit of hair that needs to be painted. I thought about blonde, but that seems like it's a little too vanilla for me. Black or dirty blonde might work. Especially keep in mind that this miniature is also going to have wings attached, so it's going to kind of look angelic, which is why I don't want to go with blonde, because I think blonde, too many people paint angels blonde, and I think that just looks kind of silly. I think I like black. I think it'll go with the aesthetic a little bit better. So yeah, so the wings are going to be, right now they're kind of this blue color for the undercoat. And I plan on working it up to white, very similar to how I did with Elbreth's wings. So we're going to have this little curve in here is going to be essentially remain the same. But as we flare out, the more white it's going to get. And then we're going to be close to white on top, kind of make it look like the light is kind of playing around with that. Again, at least that's the plan, but the plans can change. I completely missed this foot when I was doing my non-metallic metal earlier, so that's awesome. So we'll go ahead and add in some highlights here. Very hard to see even with my light here. This is for me. This is going to be a display model. So I have no reference photos. This is all going to be straight off the dome, which is why I'm trying a lot of techniques I've never tried before on it, like non-metallic metal. Well, I say never tried. I've tried some non-metallic metal, but not on this scale, not a full set of plate armor, which is why I'm kind of nervous about it. If I was painting this for somebody else, I would try to stick to things that I know I'm good at, because I want it to look good. I mean, it's a standard set of plate. It's not full plate. It's almost like half. Well, I guess it's full plate. There are some plates missing, like upper arms. So I guess it wouldn't be considered full plate. I guess it'd be considered more maybe 3/4 plate. I don't know. So I imagine it would be quite heavy, although medieval armor, unlike what most people think, was actually fairly mobile and fairly, not light, but just easy to use for the people wielding them. It was almost like a second skin. But I don't know how much it would actually weigh. Like, well, for you and Calico, it'd be kilograms, but for me, it'd be pounds. I'm not really sure. Oh yeah, it would have weighed a ton. I just don't know how much medieval armor typically weighed, how much the suit weighed. It's not something I've ever looked up. Which is weird because I do a lot of medieval stuff, right? Or at least fantasy stuff, which is based on medieval. Okay. So now while that dries, while the cape dries, I'm gonna go ahead and work on some of the strapping. So we'll start with an earth brown for our leather. And very similar to what we did with Liam's miniature, we are going to work our way up to having some nice bright edges to make it look kind of worn. I also need to do, I kind of forgot about this. Well, not really forgot, just haven't done it yet, but I need to do the, very true. And that's something that I've always loved about fantasy is like, yeah, there's physics and you need to make your physics consistent, but your physics are whatever you say they are, right? So if your creatures weigh a tenth of what they do on Earth, then that's cool. Just gotta make sure whatever rules you use are consistent throughout your world. Because we, as a, I guess you could call us a scientific society, are very attuned to stuff that's not quote unquote realistic. You know, we'll say, oh yeah, a dragon. Of course there's a dragon. But no, that dragon has to have wings that make it look like it can fly, or else immersion. And that's kind of a concept in writing that's called a suspension of disbelief. You have to be able to suspend your ability to see it as normal, right? So like, you want your audience to look at your work and say, yes, that could happen potentially. You never actually want to take your audience to a point where they're like, yeah, no way. It's absolutely bogus. That would never happen in real life. I think what I'm going to do now is start doing some of the gold. And for that, we're going to use kind of this darker, almost mahogany color. Well, more of a mustard brown, but still. Use a little bit of that, and we'll start base coating everything that I want to be gold. So we're going to start with this little chest piece here. Which I'm sorry if you can't see this, but I have to hold it close to me because it's fairly hard to see. got this kind of like gem on his chest too. I'm not exactly sure what kind of gem I want that to be eventually. Oops, that was the wrong color. Now I'm going to move the camera a little bit digitally. So that when I hold this close to me, y'all can actually see it. So we're just using that like dark mustard to start to outline some of the golden bits that we're going to be having. So unlike before, we're not really going to add a blue hue to this because when you look at gold, you typically don't see that kind of same colored reflection as you do with like silver. At least I don't think I do. I could be completely wrong. Like I said before, we're going to do these like feathers on the side. They're going to be gold. And there's this little opening here. I haven't. It sounds really interesting though. By mockumentary, do you mean that it's like that they're like fake documentaries, or they're documentary like what if documentaries? Because I remember one a while back where they did that with lightsabers, where they're like, you know what, this, if we had lightsabers, this is how we would design it. And they went through and actually designed a lightsaber. Okay, so it's a, yeah. But hear me out. What if dragons did exist, though? Do you think we would like end up doing the whole fantasy thing, like, you know, slay the whole quote unquote slay the dragon, save the girl kind of thing, or would we do like, what was that that movie, where like dragons existed and you had like these roving bands of dragon slayers that, you know, used massive chains and stuff to capture and kill dragons? Interesting. Yeah. Well, it just depends on how the dragon's fire worked, right? Because if it's like stored fire, and yeah, I could see that working. But what if it was like a way of like almost like a venom, to where the two parts of the venom collide and combust? Gotcha. Okay. So then its flame breath would just it be farting or burping. It's like our like all of science revolves around how do we keep dragons from burping. Nice. Like, how do you think, if dragons did exist, how do you think that would have affected our society, right? Because, like, you kind of got the idea, or not the idea, but like a glimpse of what, say, zombie apocalypse would do to our culture with The Walking Dead. I wonder what would happen if the same thing happened with dragons. So you go for the How to Train Your Dragon kind of deal? Yeah, it definitely would. Well, it depends, right, Liam? Like, if dragons were like actual creatures that everyone knew about and were able to tame, like Calico said, or if this were like a thing where dragons just became real, right? I think there was a movie about that. I can't remember exactly what it was called, where like dragons were dormant for thousands of years and they became undormant and started conquering the world. Like, what would happen then? If we could tame them, and that is, I think, the key there. If we can tame dragons, then it would make those technologies obsolete. Or would it? Because you would also have people, right? Horses are obsolete now as far as riding them in lieu of cars. So it would just depend on what the benefits would be for a dragon versus a airplane. The benefit of an airplane is it's, you know, for a fact it's not going to eat you, right? We know for a fact that planes can work consistently. They don't have to be they can hold more than one or two people, right? Again, we're making some assumptions here based upon like things like size. How big would this dragon be if they existed? Yeah, Rain of Fire. That's it. It was a good movie. Really, really underrated. At least I thought it was. Why wouldn't we need cars, Liam? Again, we're assuming a lot of things, right? We're assuming that, number one, dragons could be tamed. We're assuming that it is more economical to fly a dragon than drive a car. We're assuming that it is tenable for people to afford the food that it would cost for a dragon. Oh, for sure. But even if it's hypothetical, right, we would still, like we were talking about with fantasy, we want to keep it within the realm of possibility. We want to keep it within this kind of suspension of disbelief. So if dragons were real, right, and we wanted to use them as transportation, how would that feasibly work? Right, but I guess my point, Liam, is how would we make it work? Not necessarily that we would make it work. It's how would we? Because again, we haven't necessarily tamed reptilians that we have today. We just kind of keep them in captivity, right? So we don't have say iguanas that can play fetch with us on command like we do dogs. It would just depend, I guess, on number one, are they intelligent dragons, right? So are these dragons more like the ones in Skyrim where they have thoughts and minds and things like that? Take some of this white and I'm just going to really bump up the highlights on the bottom of this guy here. And maybe on the edge of her, his, I don't know why I keep saying her. All right, so I've base coated all of our gold, or most of it. I think I'm gonna leave the helmet for last. So I'm gonna go ahead and start bumping up the highlight with my gold color here. So with this, we're going to add it to all of the top pieces of our gold, or all the tops of our golden pieces, I should say. And sorry, I know you can't see when I hold it here, but again, small pieces. Just got freaking paint all over my hand. All right, and we're just gonna do that with all of our different gold pieces here. Turn this bad boy around real quick. So again, just bumping up that color and saturation the further towards our light source that we go. It's just on these little spikies here, just the very top. Once I said that, so there's a YouTube channel that I follow called Spiky Bits. So the moment I said these little spiky bits here, it made me think of that. I don't know why. Maybe because it's, you know, the same name. Duh. There are two things that I'm loving about this mini right now. Number one, tons of awesome detail. A few things I'm not liking about this mini right now are tons of awesome detail. Some of the detail is so incredibly small on this miniature that I'm having a hard time even seeing it. And some of it is on the parts that I'm wanting to make look like metal, which is going to be very difficult to actually accomplish if I can hardly even see it. Cool. All right, next side. And we're doing the same thing here, just pushing up that color. This little spike here, it's actually almost completely vertical, so this whole thing is going to get highlighted. Okay. Now I've got to figure out what I'm going to do with all this empty space in this thing too. As far as this thing, I mean like these pauldrons, because there's a lot of empty space in the middle. Again, I'm not an expert in non-metallic metal, so this is going to be, for me, very difficult to kind of parse out as I go along. I kind of know where the light would hit, but I just need to know how it's going to interact with all those different pieces and bits. Stuff like this is a little bit easier though, because it's kind of a little bit more obvious where the light would actually hit. Pretty much any surface that is pointing up. Bet whoever this character is that they've probably slain a dragon or two. What do you think? Here I'm just adding my central highlight to this plate. Again, I'm not good at this non-metallic metal, so I'm not incredibly sure this is what it would look like, but you know what, we're gonna go with it. If it doesn't look good, it doesn't look good. Highlights to some of these little details here. Again, there's so many of them on these little pieces here. They look, oh, this mini looks so cool, but it takes so long to get all of these done. And that is if I'm seeing them correctly. We'll do the same thing to this other side. Yeah, kind of like that, I guess. Ah. All right, now we're gonna bump this up a little bit, but actually first I forgot some stuff. Thought I heard something at the front door. Keep one headphone off for now. All right, well, yeah. I think for now that's going to be pretty good. We'll move up to our next color, which is going to be this kind of bright pale yellow. And this is what we use for our first highlights. We're just going to add to the very top here. And we're going to start pushing this really to all of the, just the absolute highest places on this. Now this isn't going to be the brightest highlight that we're doing. But it is the second to brightest, so we want to make sure that we're very controlled in how we are using it. Okay. And we'll do the same thing on these little thigh guards. On these, we're going to push the highlight to the peak. These little things. Like that. Jeez. My fingers are... I nearly dropped that mini. Calico almost got her wish. Almost. almost is the key word here. Not looking too bad right now. Starting to get there for sure. Yeah, we're getting there for sure. Who, me or the mini? Because I can't do a flip. The mini might, if I screw up. Alright, so we're going to add some yellow to this white until the white is, or until the yellow is almost pure white. And similar to what we did with the gray, we're going to go back through and we're just going to do the absolute very tops. This will be our final highlight stage for the gold. And I'm going to make sure that these highlights are nice and saturated, nice and bright. Because again, with polished gold, we're really looking for that nice, bright reflection. Do these sparky bits. Again, making sure that our highlights are nice and bright. not totally pleased with how this is turning out, but again, I'm going to see it through to the end. The worst thing that'll happen is I won't like how it looks. The best thing that's happened is I like how it looks and learn a lot. I feel like I'm having to convince myself to keep going. Which, you know, I feel like that's kind of common. Not just in like miniature painting, but like where you don't really think you like or know what's going on, you want it to stop, right? Just keep moving forward. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. But either way, stick with it. So I'm just adding white, this kind of white color to some of this detail to make it look like it's super reflective. This is where having a brush with a nice sharp tip comes in handy. So you can do some of this freehand work without much trouble. That is actually very true, and I find myself doing that quite a bit. I've had to learn to kind of let go and be satisfied with where I'm at, but at the same time I also have this drive to get better, and it's kind of a catch-22, right? Because you want to be able to say this piece is finished, but at the same time you want to push yourself to get better and better and better. And I do end up a lot of the times ignoring some of the positive stuff that I do. Like, for instance, on some of the TOI pieces that I did, you know, fixating on the stuff that I think I did poorly, or going back and, like, say, looking at Matt's, a couple of the minis I did for Matt, like Idris. Those were the first minis that I did, and I was still very new to miniature painting. And I think if I went back and did it again, I could do significantly better. But being satisfied with in knowing that he's happy with what I gave him. If he's happy with what I gave him, then I need to be happy with what I gave him. Instead of fixating on the fact that I can do better now. Well, guess what? I wasn't able to do better then. I did the best that I possibly could. But I even did that with writing too. Like, I was so critical on my own writing. I've done that with some of the world building work that I've done. And definitely in pretty much every miniature I've ever painted. And it's ironic too, because the moment I think that I've done a good job, I'll set it aside, I'll come back to it couple days or a couple months later, and I'm like, oh man, I should have done that. There's a miniature sitting at work where it was the first one that I was able to do really, really nice looking realistic eyes, using a technique where you essentially undercoat your eyes with red in order to kind of get that some more realistic, like, fleshiness that comes out in your eyes. It looked really, really good. It looks really, really good. But I'm wanting to go back and fix a few things on it. It's instead of being satisfied with the fact that I know it looks good. So I should be satisfied with it. And just like earlier, now that I'm looking at this, now that I've added a lot more detail, I think it looks really good. I think that it is coming along great, and that the non-metallic metal work that I'm doing it, let me shed a little more light on it so you can kind of see better. I think that looks amazing so far. There are a few things that I can do better, but you know. Do what specifically? Oh yeah, I did that on the last one. I do that a lot nowadays because I think it's a superior technique to what I used to do, which is basically just, you know, white and color. So yes, I did. I've pretty much done that with all of them since I learned how to do that. Okay. So now I'm going to go back and start on his cloak again. I'm going to take, instead of adding black, I'm just going to take that regular red that I used earlier. Instead of mixing in red, I'm just going to paint just the pigment. What I'm doing is I'm looking to keep that really dark red only in the deepest recesses. That way when I go in with my highlight color, it gives me this nice shade. As always, we want to make sure that we don't have any islands, right? So nowhere where things would naturally be connected as far as the highlights go. We don't want to leave them standing out there alone. But ironically, even though that I think I'm getting much better at that technique with the eyes, the very next miniature I paint doesn't have eyes. This one doesn't have any eyes. The helmet is covering them. So I guess it does have eyes. You just can't see the eyes, so I'm not going to be painting them. So the character has eyes, but the actual model does not. I was telling 2-Bit too when I kind of showed off this model. This model actually reminds me a lot of the way he describes Malthael, at least before the fall. Starting to really not. Well, he again, so he has wings, so I don't think walking or riding a horse would necessarily be a hazard. Especially since, I don't think he would need to ride a horse when he could just fly. Flying would probably be a little bit faster than riding a horse. The material doesn't come too far down, so it comes down to about his ankle. So I assume it'd be only as difficult as maybe wearing a skirt, right? Down that low. I would have no idea how much that restricts movement, but I guess anybody who's worn a skirt could tell me one way or the other. Probably, yeah. Probably is more ornamental. I mean, there's a lot on his armor that is ornamental, right? So, like, a lot of this gold filigree that he's got going on serves absolutely no purpose other than to maybe show his rank. Pretty much any ornamentation in armor is useless, right? Other than, like when we look at ancient Romans where they had their plumes on their helmets signified rank, weren't practical outside of that. They didn't protect him any better, right, than a normal centurion would be. So I kind of feel like it's the same with this kind of cloak he's going on. It either shows like his house colors, or it's showing his rank. Robes, right, but if you look at this model, this really isn't a robe, it's more of just a skirt of some kind. It's not covering anything that wouldn't be otherwise covered. It's not adding any more or less warmth because it's a very open design. If you look at medieval full plate armor, nobody really wore this kind of like decorative skirt. I'm just saying this particular model doesn't have a robe, not that he wouldn't use a robe. Robes in general are very useful, right? Or else we wouldn't have ever used robes. But as far as this particular part of this model, doesn't seem that it would be all that useful to the bearer, outside of showing rank or his house colors. And when I mean useful, I don't mean useful as in like it serves no purpose at all. I mean useful as in like it doesn't have a practical purpose for, like, it's not going to keep a sword from hitting him, right? It's not going to keep him any more warm, right? It's not going to keep the rain or mud off of him. But its usefulness might come into, again, rank or house colors, so that people know who he is and which side he belongs to. Very similar to why 17th and 18th century armies wore bright colors. It didn't have any practical, like, thing. A red coat would protect you as much as a blue coat would from the French, or the American army for that matter. The biggest advantage was in the fog of war and in the smoke, you were easily able to identify which side you were on. Are they wearing a red coat? Well, then they're British. Are they wearing a green coat? Oh, then they're Prussians. Are they wearing, you know, a blue coat? Well, then depending on where you're at, they could be French or American. So that's more of what I think the practicalness of this would be. But again, like we pointed out earlier, we're not necessarily talking about medieval people, right? We're talking about a fantasy world. And very specifically within that fantasy world, we're talking about this character, not necessarily his culture, because we don't know anything about his culture. He's just a model. But this is just my opinion on this particular model. Yeah, I don't think they ever would have in well, they did actually. French and Indian War. I mean, technically those were French Canadians, but the French did fight against the American when it was still a British colony. Well, again, yes and no, because it wasn't necessarily the Canadians; it was the British-controlled Canadian forces, right? So it was still a British colony. So just like technically America never fought France, because it was, well, actually we did, because we were a British colony. When y'all were a British colony, same thing. You technically didn't fight the United States. Britain did, and you were part of that war because you were a British colony. You weren't actually Canada yet. Yep, exactly. But I'm just glad we don't have to worry about that because we love each other now. Alright, so that's looking really nice. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to normally I would pull in some white to lighten it up, but the biggest thing about highlighting, at least in my experience, especially when it comes to highlighting red, you never really want to use white because white will, instead of making it lighter, desaturates it, or it makes it lighter and it desaturates it. So you want to add, instead of white, a brighter shade of red and kind of blend between your original midtone and your bright shade of red to kind of get that color that you want, right? So I kind of want a crimson, so I'm going to take some of this fire red and I'm going to mix it in until I get a brighter shade of what I already had. And then we became fast friends. And everyone happily lived after ever. And we ate a lot of your syrup. And still hate your geese. Although I'm pretty sure a lot of Canadians hate their own geese too. Canadian gooses. They're kind of jerks, aren't they? Kind of like the complete opposite of like the Canadian stereotype, right? The Canadian stereotype is too polite for your own good. Canadian geese are jerks. Taking this nice highlight color that I just made, we're just going over just the absolute top places, just highlighting that up. And really trying to, yeah, they are big. I want, my question would be, how do they actually taste? Do they taste good, or do they taste like, because you know, some fowl that are huntable just don't taste great. Like, I'm not a huge fan of like quail, for instance. Not a huge fan of duck either. We'll allow it. Yeah, AutoMod is kind of weird sometimes. It'll let through some stuff, but it'll let through like stuff that makes like that I would want them to get rid of, but then it won't allow stuff that's like jerk. Like, seriously, you don't allow jerk? What? Seriously? Oh, that's hilarious. What's ironic is I didn't like specifically allow that either. I'll have to go back and look at the rules. There might be like specific words or something that I can allow. Or like a word list or something. Fair enough. I'd rather you not spread it either, Calico. Let's see if whatever you have to say next gets caught by the Automod. The Force is not an STD, Calico. Oh man, I genuinely don't like that. Like, oh, it's kind of true, but it's also not. That's looking nice. Well, so technically it is, because midichlorians is what allows a Force user to be Force sensitive. And midichlorians are passed down from their parents. So it is an organism that is passed down from their parents to their children, which is why Luke is so strong, because Anakin had a high midichlorian count. So while the Force itself is not an STD, midichlorians, which are the things that allow one to tap into the Force, could be considered that. It's just not one that is detrimental. But I would say, Calico, that I don't think it does meet that definition, because midichlorians exist in all living creatures. So it's not necessarily a disease that one can contract. But rather it is like, for instance, we all have, as humans, red blood cells, right? We wouldn't consider red blood cells to be a disease because they occur naturally inside of us instead of midichlorians. So it is not a foreign substance being placed in our bodies. So I think that's good for the material. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use the fact that I have this back piece here as kind of a chance to practice some techniques that I'm going to be using on the rest of the miniature. True. So, I mean, if you take that into account, you could consider midichlorians to be an STD. I just don't want it to. I really don't want to consider that. Evidently there wasn't enough water in that because I am just painting right now. Instead of glazing. I don't want to be glazing. And all we're doing here is we're just going to try and smooth these lines out a bit. I don't think it's ever explained in the Star Wars universe where midichlorians come from. We just know that they naturally exist in all things. I'm gonna switch out my water real quick. So we just don't know. Yeah, I wouldn't say that necessarily got Jedi killed because the Sith, again, midichlorians exist in all things, which include the Sith. So it didn't necessarily get the Jedi killed because the Sith also have them and give them power. So if you were to say that it got the Jedi killed, then you would also have to say that it got the Sith killed too. But then you'd also have to say that it got every living creature who has ever died killed because every living creature in the Star Wars universe has midichlorians. It's just their midichlorian count determines whether or not they'll be force sensitive. But you could also make the argument that it wasn't necessarily that the midichlorians got them killed, but rather it was the way in which the Jedi went about using the power that the midichlorians gave them that ultimately led to their demise versus the midichlorians themselves. So, by the way, what I'm doing right now is I'm adding what's known as a glaze medium. So instead of using water, I'm just using this to use on my glaze. the reason I'm using a glazed medium instead of just water is because I'm using that thicker paint. So I want to be able to really smooth out those transitions. Well, I think that looks really good so far. There's a little bit of work yet that I want done, so we'll continue to touch up this real quick, but I think I'm about ready just to move to the wings. A little bit too much on, so I'm just going to really quickly wick away some of it with my brush here. Kind of spread it out. So it depends on what we consider good, Liam, right? Because what was the goal of the Jedi? The stated goal of the Jedi very often was to bring balance to the Force, right? By any means necessary, which included killing off the Sith, which ultimately failed to bring about their purpose. Because in order to bring balance, true balance to the Force, you need both light and dark side. This is something that the Gray Jedi, which I know aren't necessarily canon, but they are in the extended universe, the Gray Jedi recognize is that in order to have true balance, you need both light and dark side. And so when you end up with the Jedi basically trying to destroy the dark side altogether, they actually failed in their stated goals, and many times did become, I would posit, evil in the way that they went about it, especially if we're looking at just like the published material from like Disney and Lucasfilms. Okay, yeah, you know, we might say that the Jedi aren't necessarily fully evil, right? But if we're also looking at some of the other material, for instance, what was the where did my red go? There's a book out there where the Jedi, where it's in the Old Republic, and it's following the creation of the Rule of Two. The Jedi did some really messed up stuff. Well, that's the thing, is why did Palpatine kill them? But also, why did the Jedi try to kill Palpatine? So it's not that we're saying that the Force, that midichlorian. So I think what my point is in saying that the Force didn't kill the Jedi isn't that the Force had nothing to do with their deaths. It was that it was more of the way in which they went about using the Force that ended in their demise. So really quick, just kind of saying what I'm doing. I added in a little bit of red to my base coat for the skin tone. So I'm trying, you know, might as well if I'm trying some new stuff. I'm trying a new skin method where you undercoat the skin a little bit more red, and it makes it look really, really neat. Don't know why, it just looks visually appealing. I'm going to keep his neck dark because I think it looks really cool. Looks cooler with a dark neck, like with just like a black void there, than it would with trying to paint a skin tone underneath it. I think his hands are exposed, so we'll go ahead and treat them as such. We are getting into politics, but we're getting into fantasy politics, which I am all about. I will talk about some fantasy politics all day if it means I don't have to talk about real politics. But also, Star Wars is definitely fantasy, not a sci-fi. It is a fantasy in space. Okay, so now that we've got a little bit of his skin tone, kind of messed up the skin tone I actually wanted to use, so we'll go ahead and start with the highlighting phase for the face here. Hold on, sorry, I'm trying to read your sentence there, Liam. Incomprehended. It is not the Jedi's force powers that got the Jedi killed, but rather the opposition as it happened was too great for them to oppose. So if you're saying that the reason they got killed is because that Palpatine at the time was too powerful, then yeah, of course. Right? Palpatine played the politics game more than he played the Force game. He was a very powerful Force user, obviously. He killed Mace Windu. But in the book, Darth Plagueis, we see a totally different Palpatine, right? We see somebody who was focused on politics and bringing about change. Oops, hold on. Bringing about political change primarily, right? He kind of recognized that the problem with what the Sith had done up to that point is they sought power by military might and not through political power. And so through political power, he was able to dominate the universe like no Sith had ever done before him, including his master. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to move to the next color for skin tone, and I think that is going to be some Barbarian Flesh. That's rosy shadow, yeah. Still a little light, so let's mix it with some of this fair shadow. shades lighter here. There we go. Again, just adding a little bit of those highlights to this. Just the very tip-top pieces. And that's our skin. I think it's looking really, really nice. Well, I'm going to transition to these wings, and I'm going to leave this sit for a little while because I want to kind of step back for a moment and really figure out whether or not I'm doing with that what I want to be done. So with the wings, we are going to move our wet palette out of the way because we're not going to be using this a ton. And I went ahead and base coated this with a color that I use a lot of the time called Snow Shadow. And I'm looking for, you know, a color that would complement that. I think Ghost White is going to be good. We're going to start working on all of our dry brushing and highlights on this thing. Yeah, I'm not going to make the wings orange. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start up here at the top. I'm just going to start dry brushing at the very tops, bringing out that light, those light highlights that I want from there. Going back occasionally and getting more paint. And like I did with Elbereth's wings, I want this bit to be a little bit brighter than what I'm going to be doing later, because this is where most of the light would be hitting these wings. I'm just going to slowly work my way down. I'm going to put a little bit, just a touch on these darker areas, but not much. And down here at the bottom again, we're going to go a little bit heavier. So we kind of have a nice gradient going from brighter to darker and then back bright again. It's exactly what I want to see. So now I'm just going to go through and start refining some of these. Start making sure that the transitions are nice and blended, that we're not having like a stark bright to dark contrast. Because again, similar with skin, these feathers are going to diffuse light. And so you can already see the difference between these two. How we have this nice bright to bright transition, and then versus this one looking kind of flat. It's exactly what I'm looking for when I'm doing this. And I need more paint. That's pure white. I don't need pure white. Where's my ghost white? There you are. I should probably put my palette so that y'all can see it. So I'm just using this little dry palette here. I'm just grabbing a little bit of this ghost white, which is kind of a really light gray blue. Putting it on my brush, wiping away most of it until when I do it on my hand here, I'm noticing that it's just hitting the top of my skin, but not getting really into the recesses. And I'm just going to work it into these feathers. And that's going to give me, it's just going to hit all the top parts of the feathers, and it's not really going to hit any of the recesses, giving me this nice kind of contrast between the highs and the lows. I'm just going to keep doing that until it gets to where I want it. Again, making sure that the parts where I think the light would hit the most, it has the heaviest dry brushing. And then just making sure that those transitions between light and dark are nice and even. What would angel wings taste like? I'm assuming they would probably taste like, I don't know, probably buffalo wings. Because buffalo wings are heaven, so. Or heavenly, I should say. There we go. So now we're going to do the exact same thing on the underside, except we're going to be much lighter. Because as you can see, the underside of these, even before I start highlighting, is much, much darker. So I want minimal highlights here. I just want to hit some of these raised portions on the underside of the wing. I'm just going to be hitting them really lightly. Like that, just so it looks like there's a little bit of a reflection from the light coming in from under the wing. So you think angel wings would taste like pork chops, eh? But to be fair, angels, as at least is described in Christianity, that actually have wings do not look humanoid. So that is all I'm going to do the underside there. So again, just that little bit of highlighting there. I'm going to flip them back over, and I'm going to take some of my white here. And since this is a thicker, kind of pastier paint, I think it's going to work a little bit better for dry brushing than normal, like acrylic paint would. Make sure I wash this paintbrush off. And we're going to do the same thing, except we're going to start limiting the amount of highlights that we have to just the absolute top parts. Right where the light would be the strongest. Again, we're giving us that nice brighter spot here, really emphasizing that with our dry brushing, or at least trying to. Blend in that transition a little bit more. Then move to the bottom. There we go. And just like that, our wings are done. Easy peasy. I'm gonna clean off my dry brush here. All right, so these are then going to connect to the back here. I just want to dry fit real quick just to see what it's going to look like. Not bad. And then the other side, pretty much completely covered up by the wings. But still looks great, I think. Well, that's, I think, all we'll do tonight. I think it's looking great. Better than I thought it would. And I think we will pick this back up tomorrow at the normal time, so 8 o'clock Eastern. If y'all want to come hang out, please do so. But yeah, thank you all for joining me on this impromptu painting session. I was just way too excited about this mini. But I will see you all here tomorrow. I hope y'all have a great evening, and I'll talk to y'all later. Peace out.